Okay, so starting off today's show, you guys know how we do it. Each and every Tuesday episode on the Zach Kroll Sports Podcast, we go around the league talking about my top 10 takeaways from the week. So without further ado, let's do it. Boys, hit the music. Takeaway number one. I think Dak Prescott's injury really just reminded us what the game of football is really all about. We know how fun this game is. We know how serious we take it. But I think Dak Prescott's injury was just a reminder of just how lucky we have to be and how thankful we are for these opportunities that we got. Dak Prescott has been a guy that has played in every single game since the start of his NFL career. And all of a sudden, in a snap, his career is just not looking the same. We all know what happened with his contract situation in the offseason, and this injury obviously doesn't help that, and we're going to get a little more into this later on the show, but I just wanted to say, big shout out to Dak Prescott. I know he's going to recover well. I know he's going to come back as strong as ever, because that guy just works way too hard not to. And you saw, like, throughout the game, when the injury happened, the Cowboys players just looked shocked. They didn't even know what to do. And to be honest, that's kind of how my reaction was as well. Super ironic that Jason Garrett, Dak Prescott's head coach every season of his career before this one, was in the building, as well as the fact that Tony Romo, the guy that Dak Prescott replaced as the starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, was calling the game. It really just takes you full circle, and I just wanted to say once again, I really hope Dak Prescott is okay. That was one of the more scarier football injuries, to be honest, I really ever remember watching, as there is a difference between an injury like that and, something else. So I just wanted to say once again, Dak, I know you're going to recover and be as strong as ever. So my thoughts and prayers are with Dak Prescott after that just tough injury. Moving on to takeaway number two. The Vegas Raiders offense is legit. And even though their defense played really well in the second half, and I think eventually that was probably the main reason why they ended up winning that game, I was super impressed in the first half of this game, the way Derek Carr was able to just sling the ball down the field for this Raider team. And not only that, but really just throughout the game, the Raiders were going punch for punch with the Chiefs. I remember in the offseason, Derek Carr was interviewed and he said, I need more respect. I want more respect. And I remember looking at those comments and kind of laughing about them just because, think about it. What has Derek Carr done since that one season in 2016 when he got hurt to win the MVP? Or almost winning the MVP? Really nothing. And I think for Derek Carr to talk like that before the season started, that was kind of something that put a little bit of a target on his back this season along with the Raiders. But so far, so good. The Raiders are sitting at 3-2. I really like the way they played, not only Sunday against the Chiefs, but they have a win over the Saints. They also have a win over the Carolina Panthers on the road, who are playing some really good football right now. And I think this Raider team looks like a playoff team to me in the AFC. I think they're kind of on that same level as a Cleveland or in Indianapolis. I still don't think right now, even with this road win over Kansas City, that they're good enough to win the AFC West. But who knows? And then in terms of Kansas City, I'm really not that worried. I know their offensive line didn't play great in this game. I know their defense obviously didn't play great in this game as well. But I just trust Patrick Mahomes more than most other quarterbacks in the league in crunch time. I was also super impressed with the way the Chiefs kind of got up for that big game against Baltimore. To be honest, I just think they sleepwalk sometimes, and I'm not concerned at all. So that's takeaway number two. Really nice job by the Raiders. Takeaway number three. How good is this rookie receiver class, considering the fact that Chase Claypool, who was the guy that was drafted in the third round and no one really wanted, he had not one, not two, not three, but 4 touchdowns on Sunday against the Philadelphia Eagles in a super impressive offensive performance in the win by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think when you look at the Steelers, an underrated part of their organization is how well they are at drafting wide receivers. Usually, when you look at guys who make a big-time impact as wide receivers in the NFL, we look at your, CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper, Calvin Johnson, guys that were drafted really high up in the draft. Chase Claypool is not one of those guys. And neither are guys like Mike Wallace, Antonio Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, Deontay Johnson. And one of those guys all have in common, you guessed it, they were drafted later in the first round by the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they were late round picks by Pittsburgh, and the Steelers over the last couple years, I think underratedly, have done a really good job developing their receivers, and Kevin Colbert and Mike Tomlin do deserve a lot of credit for that. In terms of this Steeler team, I wasn't that impressed with their defense. I think in order for them to win games long term, their defense really needs to be better. But I love Chase Claypool. I love Juju Smith-Schuster, James Washington, Benny Snell, James Conner, the way those guys are playing. And I do think if Pittsburgh's defense could get to the point where we thought they were, I still think they're a super good team, but I thought before the season started that their defense was going to be the best defense in football. And it's not like their defense has been bad, but I want to see an elite performance when they play Baltimore or when they take on the Cleveland Browns at home this week. Just huge games all around coming up for Pittsburgh and some of the other teams in the AFC North, but just super hard not to be super impressed with Chase Claypool. Takeaway number 4. Finally, the Falcons decided to fire Dan Quinn, and it took long enough. The fact that this Falcon team lost to the Carolina Panthers at home is an absolute disgrace. And we're going to actually get into the Carolina Panthers a little bit later in this segment, but I want to specifically talk here about Dan Quinn and the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, number 1, Arthur Blank apparently let it be known to not only Dan Quinn, but also the Falcons GM, Thomas Dimitroff, that if the Falcons miss the playoffs this year, then both of those guys are getting fired. And rightfully so. The Falcons have missed the playoffs each of the last 2 seasons. And the Falcons this year start off 0-5. So Arthur Blank is like, you know what, Dan Quinn? Enough's enough. This is all I need to see. You're out of here. And I think it was the right call because the Atlanta Falcons have talent. And not only do they have talent, but you guys realize they have the 3rd highest cap hit in the league right now? And they're sitting at 0-5? That's really not good. And when you let the Carolina Panthers come into your building and beat you up like that, without Christian McCaffrey, I don't care how good of a coach Matt Rule is or how good Teddy Bridgewater is playing. That is just really unacceptable for a team like the Atlanta Falcons. And to be really honest with you guys, they just haven't been the same team since Kyle Shanahan left. And that's another sign for me to say, all right, Dan Quinn, just not the right guy for the job. If you pride yourself as a defensive coach and you let that happen to you, nah, that can't happen. And he's gone, and rightfully so. So it's going to be interesting to see what Raheem Morris could do with these Falcons. I think this team is due for a rebuild. I think this is going to be Matt Ryan's last year. I think it's going to be Julio Jones's last year. And ultimately, it's the right move for the Falcons to get rid of Dan Quinn and move on because this thing was just falling apart way, way too quickly. Takeaway number 5. Matt Rule. We'll stay with this game. Matt Rule, very quietly, has been one of the best coaching hires this offseason. I've been super impressed with the way the Carolina Panthers have been able to come out every week and get the job done, especially each of the last 3 weeks without Christian McCaffrey. I remember watching the Panthers in their Week 1 game against the Las Vegas Raiders, and they were down late in the game by one or two points. They had the ball in Raider territory on 4th and 1, and Matt Rule didn't let Christian McCaffrey touch the ball. I believe he gave it to his fullback, Alex Arma. He was stopped, and the Raiders ended up winning the game. And I remember telling myself after I saw that, I was like, all right, what are we doing here? Like, why aren't you giving the ball to Christian McCaffrey? And I kind of thought, okay, maybe the players may lose some faith in Matt Rule as the team's head coach. However, that hasn't been the case at all. Since Christian McCaffrey's gotten hurt in their Week 2 game against Tampa Bay, Carolina is sitting here at 3-0 since that game. And when you look at the NFC right now, the South isn't the toughest division. Obviously, I think New Orleans and Tampa Bay are a little bit better than Carolina right now. But at the same time, what I will say is this. They're competitive, and they can compete with anyone. They could put up points. The Robbie Anderson signing looks like a really good one. My Jets miss him a lot. DJ Moore looks like a really good young receiver. They have some good players on defense that are coming up clutch, like Yetur Gross-Matos, Derek Brown. Shaq Thompson obviously still doing his thing. I like the corner Jackson. He got hurt. I hope he's okay. But I think this Carolina Panther team has been one of the more underrated stories in the NFL so far. And if you're a fan of Carolina, I think you have to be really excited with the way Matt Rule has really guided your team and the progress that he's making in such a short time, in such a crazy, hectic offseason as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. So I'm really going to be looking forward to see what Matt Rule could do to continue his coaching job in Carolina. Takeaway number 6. How good was it to see Alex Smith back out there on the football field? I know he didn't play that well, and I know the Washington football team is an absolute mess right now, but we were talking about it when we mentioned Dak Prescott. I think sometimes we forget just how harsh and just how scary the game of football is. And the fact is that Alex Smith, when he had that leg injury a couple of years ago, you really just didn't know if he was ever going to walk again. You know, his leg was maybe about to be amputated. The fact that that is a story just blows my mind. And the fact that he played the other day blows my mind as well. But he deserves so much credit for the fight and the rehab that he was able to do. I'm sure you guys saw the E60 on him during the quarantine that came out. And he deserves so much credit. Unfortunately, he wasn't really able to play that well and get the job done. But for me, that doesn't even matter here. It's kind of like the Dak Prescott injury. Once he got hurt, the game didn't really matter to me. And even though the Washington football team ended up losing this game, I still think Alex Smith has just a lot to be happy about. The fact that he was able to get back on the field after an injury like that, he deserves a lot of credit. And the thing about Alex Smith is, this is a guy that really has been dealing with adversity since he's entered the league. This is a guy who was drafted by the San Francisco 49ers, former number 1 overall pick. And you guys remember, when Mike Singletary was the coach, he really wasn't able to do anything. He called him a loser. Mike Singletary said, "We want winners on this team." And Alex Smith was able to come back under Jim Harbaugh, win the starting quarterback job, win a playoff game. He then moved on to Kansas City when people were criticizing the way he played and won a bunch of games there. I think Alex Smith has had a really nice career, and he's showed you battling back from many different problems, many different, things of adversity, and he's been able to get the job done. If I'm Alex Smith, you just really got to be thankful. And I really just respect how hard he's worked to get back on the field. Takeaway number 7. Are the Cleveland Browns good? Because I think I'm ready to say the Cleveland Browns are a good football team. Kevin Stefanski, man, this guy deserves so much credit for the way this Cleveland Browns, not only offense, but really their whole team has looked. This is like the least amount of chaos and hecticness that I ever remember covering a Cleveland Browns team. They're 4-1, and their quarterback hasn't even been great. I still think he's going to get better and better. Cleveland's offensive line play has really improved as well. They punched Indianapolis in the mouth the other day, and I don't think the Colts were really ever ready to make a legitimate comeback. And Kevin Stefanski deserves a lot of credit. You also see how the Minnesota Vikings and Kirk Cousins and their offense looks right now without Kevin Stefanski, and you saw Stefanski was actually able to kind of turn Kirk Cousins around during his last year in Minnesota. So Kevin Stefanski, I think, is one of the better young coaches in the league that I am willing to buy some stock in. And when I look at Cleveland, I still think that when I look at their roster, they're one of the 10 most talented teams in football. And I think if you're a fan of the Cleveland Browns, when you have that kind of talent and that kind of coaching that I think they do have in this dude, Kevin Stefanski, there are a lot of reasons for optimism going forward. Now, when we spoke about the Steelers, I get it. Cleveland goes there next week. Cleveland also plays in a really tough division in the AFC North. It's going to be very fascinating to me to see, all right, how do they do against teams like Baltimore? How do they do against teams like Pittsburgh, especially when you consider the fact that in week 1, they kind of looked like the same old Browns as they got absolutely destroyed by the Baltimore Ravens. So I do think they need to play better, but at the same time, I do like what I've seen from Cleveland so far this season. I just want to see them do it against, some of the better teams in the NFL. Takeaway number 8. How good is Russell Wilson, man? This dude is the MVP, and the Seahawks, I'm just convinced, will never lose at home again. No matter what, this guy, if it's a close game, is always able to get the job done. We saw last night in the Monday Night Football game, right? When we were talking about the Saints and the Chargers, and I'm going to talk about the Chargers in a little bit, but I feel like the Chargers are one of those teams that every game they play, no matter what happens, it's always close. And for me, when I look at the Chargers, they're kind of the opposite of the Seahawks. You guys realize over the last couple of years just exactly how many close games the Seattle Seahawks have played in? It's been a lot. And what's the common theme there? No matter how many games they play in, they always seem to find a way to win those games. And I think when you look at Seattle, they're doing the same thing again this season. They win no matter what coast they're on. You guys know, everyone in the media always talks about, oh, if you're a West Coast team traveling to the East Coast, you always got to worry about those, 1 p.m. body clock games. And I think this is a perfect example of that. Seattle goes into Miami and wins last week. They go into Atlanta and win in week 1. And I understand those teams are, not great, but still Seattle was able to, manage to get the victory. And I think when you look at the way the Seahawks are playing right now, with their defense as well, I know it was only one game and one performance against the Minnesota Vikings. You have to be feeling pretty optimistic because right now, when you look at the NFC, besides Seattle and Green Bay, and maybe the Rams, maybe the Bucs, even though I wasn't really that impressed with their effort on Thursday Night Football, I think you have to favor Seattle and the way Russell Wilson is playing right now as a legitimate favorite to win the Super Bowl. They're playing that good. You obviously throw Kansas City in the mix, maybe Baltimore as well, but Seattle just doesn't lose close games. They're the opposite of the Chargers, and they always just somehow, some way find a way to get the job done. Observation number 9. Is Jimmy Garoppolo good? Because the more and more I watch him, I don't know if he's that good. And I don't think, he's been the same quarterback since he tore his ACL. And I understand he's shown flashes over the last couple of years. And I even said before on this podcast, right, that I didn't think Jimmy Garoppolo was the main reason why the San Francisco 49ers lost the Super Bowl. You guys want to know the main reason why the San Francisco 49ers lost the Super Bowl? It was because of Patrick Mahomes and the fact that no other team in the league has a player really like him that can make those kind of throws that he made late in that game. However, Jimmy Garoppolo on Sunday against the Dolphins, do I think he was 100% healthy? No. But at the same time, that was a bad and ugly performance. If you're a San Francisco 49er fan and you watch that, I don't know how you can't be at least a little concerned, because you're at home against the Miami Dolphins, and some of these throws, man, they were just hideous. And it's going to be interesting for me to see where the San Francisco 49ers go from here. We're actually going to be talking about them more in depth a little bit later in the show, but they play in one of the hardest divisions in football. We already spoke about Russell Wilson. You guys know the Rams are 4-1 and have beaten every team in the NFC East. And Arizona is 3-2, and they have a boatload of talent. So I think when you look at this San Francisco 49er team, they have to step it up. Their schedule over the next couple weeks is really tough. And the good news for them, though, is I think if any coach, if I were to trust any coach to get the job done, it would be Kyle Shanahan. I think he's one of the 5 best coaches in the league, but they just keep on needing him to step up in order to get the job done. They need to ride him. They need to ride Kittle. They need to ride Mostert. And to be honest, I'm a little worried about Jimmy Garoppolo and the way he's been playing over the last couple weeks. Moving on to the final takeaway. I just want to talk a little bit about that Saint Charger game because that was one of the best games I've seen all year. Number one, I don't think the New Orleans Saints are a good football team. They should have lost that game last night. And they showed flashes, I get it. They were down 20-7 and were able to get the job done. But Sean Payton, stop giving the ball to Taysom Hill. It just ruins the flow of their offense every single time, and it never works. I understand he ran for a touchdown in 3rd and 4, but why are you leaving Taysom Hill in the game to run that play and taking Drew Brees, your Hall of Fame quarterback, out? And I don't want to hear about Jameis Winston because I understand he led the league in touchdowns last year, but, I don't think he's a realistic option right now either. I think he needs like a year or two to really learn that Saints system. But at the same time, man, I just don't get what the Saints are doing. They didn't play well last night. They had so many opportunities to lose, just so many special team penalties. And when Alvin Kamara isn't churning, I don't know how the Saints team is going to be able to score. Obviously, it didn't help that Michael Thomas was hurt, and he wasn't even hurt. He punched a teammate, So he hasn't played since week 1 when he got hurt. So they're going to need Michael Thomas to be back and really step up his game. And I don't believe in the New Orleans Saints long term. I think Drew Brees looks kind of washed. I understand he got the job done last night, but still, I don't trust the New Orleans Saints to make the playoffs right now. Maybe they'll sneak in as a wild card. But when I look at the NFC South, there are no real appealing options. We'll talk about Tampa Bay in a bit. But I think when you look at New Orleans, there are a lot of concerns right now. And quickly on the Chargers, I was impressed with Justin Herbert. The way he played was phenomenal. He throws a really, really pretty deep ball. And I think when you look at this Charger team, they could definitely be, a team that could be kind of sneaky and, gives teams some losses they didn't necessarily expect to get. But Anthony Lynn is not the answer, and whoever is the next head coach of the Chargers is in for a real, real nice day, because Justin Herbert, if you're any coach on the free agent market, I really don't know why you wouldn't want to coach that guy.